So, so where do you think the field is going? Let's talk a bit more about human-animal interactions. Where do you, because that is a field, I mean, it's so diverse. And I think veterinary behavior is starting to settle down on a number of different paradigms, and we you know, we're making good progress and in that area. But human-animal interactions, that's still growing very rapidly, and it's still, you know, I don't think we've settled on, I mean, too much. The value of animals is certainly becoming appreciated, I think. And somebody was telling me that in the States, in the next decade, something like 90% of animal-assisted therapy will be emotional support dogs and PTSD type things. I was thinking, whoa, you know.
Been a big shift from the founders, all except for Erica, all came from something like animal behavior or animal ecology. So that was the root of the field. But what's happened is a huge shift toward emphasizing human health and roles of animals in human health, assisting roles of various kinds. And the people coming into the field are more human health oriented. So that's been a big change or broadening of the field. And then it's a field unlike any other because it has this huge economic input, philanthropy, and also economic investment from the pet products companies, the pet food companies, the lobbying by AVMA. I mean, there's it's not like any other discipline in the magnitude of that kind of investment that's made in a favorable way. And then there's the whole view of pet owners and their investment in it. They're wanting to believe that the animal is going to do all these things for them. So there's this kind of positive skew that always makes it difficult to do a really well-controlled study.
So yeah, so we actually chatted about this, didn't we, a couple of years ago? We talked about the idea of trying to get a meeting together through the Royal Society about the problem of doing research in human-animal interactions, because yeah, people have vested interest. Now you mentioned earlier on in this chat about Hal Herzog, who, I mean, I love his stuff. And I've never met him, so I don't know him at all. But I might ask you to introduce me so I can do a podcast with him, because again, Hal Herzog is somebody who is, you know, a healthy skeptic of, I think, a lot of the stuff, and you need those voices where somebody says, "Hang on," you know, because again, you know, one of the things in science, and I mentioned this again in one of the earlier chats, we often don't publish negative results. So if you don't find an effect of the pet on somebody's health, you tend not to publish it because it's a negative result, and journals generally like something that has got a significant effect, which actually means that the publications are skewed towards showing these effects, unless they're showing a negative effect. And I think, you know, I like Hal's blog because, as I said, it's always worth reading and sort of just to hear that counterpoint rather than get taken away, because there are lots of issues, I think, with this the field of human-animal interactions. It's such a potentially important field. We did a calculation a few years ago, because certainly in the UK, this is not an area that's well funded. It's not taken on board by the medical profession, and it's very difficult to get the voice heard. And so I worked with some colleagues in the School of Business to try and work out, using Headley's work on economic significance. And we decided we'd do the calculation of how much we thought pet ownership saved the NHS, our National Health Service in the UK. And we came up with a figure, and we took a conservative estimate based on reduced use of the NHS by pet owners and scaled it through. And it came out as somewhere in the region of £3.5, nearly £4 billion a year. So, you know, we get the newspaper headlines that say dog bites are costing the NHS £10 million a year, but you've got to put that in context. one of the reasons why we wanted to do this is because we thought, well, maybe policymakers will actually start to listen if we can quantify it economically. And again, I think with some of the issues with that we've been facing with government cuts, we went through a period of austerity with the turn down in the economy. Local councils started to look at, well, is there a way that we can save money? And that has been quite a big boost to the field. So, if a child doesn't go to school because they've got social anxiety, that's going to cost the local council, hundreds of thousands of pounds a year in terms of trying to help with the mental health of that individual, etc., let alone their future life prospects, because they're much more likely to end up in a life of crime or needing additional mental health support. But if you get a dog with them, then suddenly they will go to school, and schools are open to this. And so a number of councils have suddenly started to open up to this. So again, there have been those opportunities, but and again, you might not have any opinion on this whatsoever, but it just makes me wonder, do you have any thoughts about, where do you think companion animals really help, and where do you think actually they probably don't, maybe despite the hype or anything like that? Have you got any thoughts or opinions on that? This is not about being a scientist, this is just sharing ideas.
Well, what I was thinking about as you were talking is the funding of the field, because there is beginning to be some funding, but basically it's still minuscule. So we've always talked about doing hip pocket research, very little funding, but still finding ways to be very productive. So what do animals actually do? I think that's still a challenging question, because is it the chicken or the egg? Is it that people who are already high functioning understand that having that animal is going to complement their function and make it even better? Or is it that the animal is actually doing it? It's some kind of mixture.
So I had a master's student a few years ago, and as part of her master's, we started a systematic review looking at the sort of welfare benefits to humans of dogs. And I said, what I want us to do is I want us to exclude people who have got a mental health problem. What is the effect on normal people? She did a lot of work, and actually we found very little evidence that for normal healthy people that they're not enhancing, and we couldn't find much data to suggest that. So people, again, in the COVID crisis, we're doing some work at the moment looking at people and their pets during the lockdown, and again, we're just sort of, it seems to be that people who have pre-existing conditions are the ones that are benefiting from the pet, which I know is just
vulnerable people. It's much easier to get an effect with vulnerable people, and if they're astute and they're being very mindful in how they make use of the animal to improve their lives, then it really makes a difference. So we have one friend that I've known since his spinal injury in the 1980s, and he has always understood that his dog is an icebreaker with everyone that he meets. And he makes use of that in a very conscious way. He comes in and talks to my class each year. So for him, having a dog is so essential, and it's a huge enhancement and broadening of his life in terms of his social contacts and friends, and people all know him and all of that. But part of it is because of his own wisdom in knowing how to be strategic in the use of its dog.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think the dog is a social catalyst. Again, I think the value of that is greatly underestimated. So it was the work in Australia, wasn't it, where they started to look at, if you built housing and you didn't put areas where people could walk their dog, then you didn't get pet owners, and the places soon became ghettos and nobody knew their neighbours. But if you have a park where people can walk their dog, even the non-dog walkers go there and they get to meet people and they chat, and you develop a community.
Yeah, it's a tremendous neighborhood facilitator, but it only works for people who make use of it. So people who choose not to take walks during the day, it's not going to do anything for them.
Well, during this pandemic, at least here in California and in the States, there's been a tremendous uptake of dogs from the shelters and whatever. There really are, people are going out and reaching out to bring a dog into
They're adopting animals, and the shelters are all out of dogs.
Oh, wow.
And there's concern about what's going to happen after the pandemic ends, because you worry about them getting relinquished. And even before the pandemic, when we were at the Therio meeting, we were hearing that the projections are, with the normal number of deaths of dogs each year in the States, just to replace those, we need 1 million dogs imported each year. We're currently importing more than 1 million dogs, mostly from Asia. And right now there's no control. There's no infection control over the status of those dogs. And we have some pending legislation to try to get that regulated so that veterinarians would be inspecting those dogs as they come in.
Wow, that's yeah. And one of my students was commenting that, again, with the lockdown, trap neuter release programs for cats have stopped, and so we're getting an explosion of feral cats again in the UK. So I hadn't thought about that at all, but yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there, because I think we're going to have the opposite problem. Yeah, we're going to have too many cats around as a result of that. But we'll see. But yeah, there's a big concern. There's been an enormous demand for puppies during lockdown, and yeah, people are worried what is going to happen. I've actually got a longitudinal study running at the moment with some colleagues in the States, where we're actually, we've asked people during lockdown, and each month they get sent a reminder, and I'm hoping that people will stick with it until they return to normal. And we're trying to see what's happening to these dogs. Are they acquiring new dogs, but also the dogs that they've got, what happens? Rather than just do a snapshot, to try and do it on a longitudinal basis. But we don't know what the data is going to show. Anyway,